Hi, and welcome back to the Programming in Ninox Learning Series. In the next three classes, we're going to explore the relational component of the Ninox relational database environment. Relationships are ways that tables can share information that is common. For example, we might have a customer table and we want to refer back to the customer data from multiple different tables in our application. A relationship from the table that requires customer data back to the table that contains the customer data creates this three-dimensional or relational concept that is the core of the Ninox relational environment. To begin understanding relationships, let's go into our data model. And here we see all of the tables of our application represented as boxes. We also see these arrows that tell us that this table has a relationship to that table. Here we have our product table, which is where we define all of our inventory. And this outward pointing arrow tells us that the product table looks to the vendor table to find out who provides us with that inventory. As we know from a previous class, inventory comes from two places, either the vendors that sell it to us or the factories that we own that produce it. So we see another arrow, again from the product table, reaching out to the factory table. When you have two entirely different groups, or what we call families or stacks, and an arrow connecting those stacks, this is what we call an external link or an outer join. In this class, we're going to study the outer join, the relationship between two separate data families or data stacks. To understand the external relationship or this external reference, imagine a question and answer scenario. The product table is asking, where does this inventory come from? And the answer is either in the vendor table by way of the name of the vendor who provides it, or the factory table by name of the record that indicates which of our factories produces this piece of inventory. Here we see it from a data model or data architecture perspective. Let's now look at it from a data user perspective. Let's go into our product table where we see that we have two sources of inventory. Inventory that we purchase from a vendor or inventory that we manufacture in one of our factories. Both of these fields are a special kind of field called a reference field. Here we see the vendor reference, which is a relationship from the product table to the vendor table. And this could be a many-to-one relationship, which is to say many products could potentially be supplied by one vendor. And keep in mind that arrow that we saw on the data model. The arrow starts where the question is being asked. Who provides us this inventory? And the arrow points to the table that contains the answer. It's one of the records in the vendor table. To look at how we create these relationships, I'm going to go to the transaction table. And here we see another instance where two different fields appear depending on a choice that we make in the choice field. If it's a purchase transaction, we can select from vendors in our vendor table. And here we see the result of that outer relationship where the transaction table is pointing to the vendor table. Let's go ahead and build a relationship from the transaction table to our customer table. I'm going to come down to the relationship to option, which we see right here at the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to click on it and indicate that from the transaction table, I want to point to or relate to my customer table. And now we see we have a relationship from the transaction table to the customer table. And where I have a customer with multiple transactions, I don't have to type the name over and over again. I can simply be here in the transaction table, which is pointing to my customer table, and many transactions can all be pointed or related to one record or one customer in this table. Let's see this in action. I'll click on the table or the field that represents the relationship to that table, and Ninox will display for me the ID, customer name, and phone numbers of the records in the customer table. I can specify when I'm in administrative mode what I want this pop-up to look like. And all I really want to see is the customer name. So I will hide these other fields. And since it's a very short list and I'm only looking at one field, I don't need to have this pop-up cover my entire screen. I can go in and specify that I'd like to see this as a combo box. So now, when I click on the downward pointing arrow for the customer field, I see all of my customers and I can make my selection. Now remember, when we drew that arrow and we created this reference or relationship from the transaction table to the customer table, we drew that arrow that started here and pointed to this, the customer table. Let's look at the effect on the other side of the relationship, here in the customer table. Here we see a list of all of the transactions associated with this customer. Now we can do with this embedded list everything that was possible with the embedded views that we studied in our last class. We can go in and specify the fields that we wish to see. We can define how we want those fields to be displayed. I want it in descending order. I want a count of transactions, and I want a sum of transaction amounts. So now, if I'm here in the transaction table and I enter a transaction for Karen Jackson, when I go look at Karen Jackson's customer record, there is that transaction. And I can go the other way. Think of that arrow, that relationship, as a bridge. A moment ago, I was on the transaction side of the bridge and crossed over to the customer side. Here I am at the customer side. If I wish to cross over and create a new transaction, I simply hit Create Record. And sure enough, Karen Jackson's name already appears. I type in the amount of the transaction, note the date, and when I come back to her record, we note that Karen has 2 transactions with a sum total of $2,000 in spend. These links from one data stack to another enable us to leverage content from anywhere in our application. In our next class, we're going to look at the parent-child relationship and the differences between that and the outer join that we've seen here. I'll see you in the next class. Visit us at www.nioxis.com. Here you can learn about different Ninox solutions. You can get tech support through our Ninox Help Desk, which is available 7 days a week, or you can schedule private one-on-one concierge sessions for training, or we can help you build your application. And if you haven't done so already, sign up for our free Ninox Learning Lab. We do this every Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. in the UK, 6 p.m. Central European Time. These free hour-long sessions enable you to learn more about Ninox, features, functions, and solutions. We have open Q&A where you can get answers to all your Ninox questions, and you can meet other members of the global Ninox community. We look forward to seeing you there.